Hello, welcome to Carol's Kitchen. Today we're going to dispense with the normal cooking format that I usually have. Instead, we are fortunate enough to have a guest speaker today. Her name is Greer Underwood. Greer has been working with reduced calorie cooking for the past 15 years and has also authored 2 cookbooks. One entitled The Gourmet Light and her more recent one, The Enlightened Gourmet. Greer is also a spokesperson and consultant for Kane Company Incorporated. She has written many articles for local magazines and newspapers. She has been on numerous TV stations, and it's a real nice treat to have Greer today, and we'll have a little dialogue about low-fat cooking techniques and various ways to trim fat in the diet. So I'd like to welcome Greer Underwood to our show today.
Thank you, Carol. I'm very happy to be here. I have to make one correction on your introduction, if I might.
Please do.
I do have 2 cookbooks. The first one is called the Gourmet Light Cookbook, but the second one is not any longer called The Enlightened Gourmet. We had to change the name. It was originally entitled, your notes are absolutely correct, The Enlightened Gourmet, but we had to change it to the Gourmet Light Menu Cookbook because it turned out that there was another book that had already been published by the name of The Enlightened Gourmet. So it's the Gourmet Light Menu Cookbook.
Okay, so everybody got that. It's
Everybody
the Gourmet
right.
Light Menu Cookbook.
That's right.
Now, my first question for you would be, I would like to know, and I'd like the audience here to know, when did you first become interested in low-cal gourmet cooking, and how did that lead into your writing career?
Well, it's not a quick, easy answer, but I'll try not to bore your listeners too much with it. I have always thoroughly enjoyed cooking. I started cooking when I was your daughter's age. I was the family muffin maker and cake maker and cookie baker, and that was kind of my job, and I really loved it. Then as I grew up, I continued to enjoy cooking, but I got a little bit away from the baking and more into the make the meal sort of aspect of cooking. And I started by, I learned how to cook by reading. I read every cookbook I could lay my hands on. I would read cookbooks at night the way people would read novels. And I became very interested basically in French cooking, what I now call full-fat French cooking.
Right.
And I tried
The Julia Child type of cooking.
Right. Oh, yes, I read all her books cover to cover. As if they had a plot, which of course they don't, but I began to think that they did, I think. At any rate, I started cooking a great deal, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. But I have always had a concern with weight. I'm not terribly tall, although I'm seated. You may not be able to tell it right now, but I can't exactly eat tons and tons of food, or I would put on weight.
Well, you don't appear to have a weight problem.
Because I'm real short. But all this full-fat French cooking could add up after a while. So I began to look for ways that I could make really wonderful food, but take out some of the fat.
Right.
And I did that by, of course, finding out what made for fat food, and became calorie knowledgeable, I guess you might say, or
and also very fat conscious, which is what dietitians today are really zooming in on, the area of fat per se in the diet. And so I think if you were thinking in those terms back then, you were ahead of your time.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear.
Really ahead of your time, because people did not think about fat in the diet and what was actually making them fat. So you had a very new idea when it was just starting to
I did, actually. When I first started teaching cooking, I offered regular French cooking courses for that very reason. No one at that time was interested in low-calorie cooking.
Right.
However, it was low-calorie cooking that I was doing at home, French cooking that I was teaching in classes, and people began to say to me, Greer, you're not eating this way at home. What you're teaching us in class, how do you eat when you're at home?
Right.
And that's how I started getting into my low-calorie cooking, and that's actually when I started writing, too, about
So then at that time you decided, let me put this down into a cookbook.
More people became interested in what I was doing. I didn't jump right into a cookbook per se. That would have been the height of hubris. to have never published a written word in my entire life and to have instantly had a book. I actually went to classes to learn how to become a freelance writer, just at continuing education courses. Their advice was very sound. They said write for free for your local newspapers and magazines and that kind of thing, which is what I did. And then when I would get a few articles published in my local hometown newspaper for nothing, and I had enough clips together, I gathered them up and wrote an article and sent it into a magazine. once I had a few published articles, then the magazine was more willing to look at my work as an established freelance writer.
Okay.
And once I had enough magazine articles, then a publisher was willing to look at me as an established writer. And then
So
I was
you
able to get my
started
book.
writing little articles for newspapers,
For
putting
free.
your ideas in for free, magazines, and then this spun off to your
Yeah.
cookbooks.
Yeah, it was a very thought-out, planned approach. I wanted to publish a cookbook, but I knew I couldn't if I didn't have.
Did you
what
have a
writers
business
call
plan per
clips.
se then, or had you learned how to develop a business plan?
I had
for-
gone to just continuing education classes to find out how to do this.
in the Boston area, I would assume?
Yeah, but
Okay.
any major
Right.
urban area has
Okay,
that. So.
well, very good. So anybody who is ascribing to be an author can take some lessons from Greer today.
Or other people who have similar expertise and can show them the ropes and how to do it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, then that leads into my next question, because I was reading your biography and it said that your food had originated from a type of a cuisine called spa cuisine, and which is now defunct and no longer in vogue. But can you describe what that meant and how that affected your cooking?
Yeah, I think actually you're thinking of cuisine masseur, which is sort of no longer with us.
Right.
Spa cuisine still does exist if you are willing to pay, $500 a day to enjoy it in some of the
In the-
lovely
yeah.
resorts in the West and in California. There's even one in Western Massachusetts. Cuisine masseur originated with a very famous French chef who went to his doctor one day and was told that he absolutely had to cut back on his fat intake and his sodium intake or die. And he decided that that didn't sound like a good idea, so perhaps he better modify what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And he dreamt up cuisine masseur, which was diet food for the wealthy and the food knowledgeable people of the world.
What would minceur translate from the French to the
Tiny.
Small.
Yeah, just very
I would-
small.
Okay.
And the food was very, very artfully presented, almost no fats at all. It was just elegant to look at and elegant to eat, and anybody would lose weight on it because there wasn't very much there and there was almost no fat.
Right.
But it took a bevy of cooks in the kitchen to produce. He was a restaurateur, and he could tell all of his little scrub cooks, get this together for me, get this together, get this together, and then he could create an elegant dish. But I don't have
No, we know.
servants in my kitchen.
This will not fit into our lifestyle.
But I
right?
read his book very thoroughly, and I read everything that I could find about cuisine masseur, and I took the basic tenets of it, the basic ideas, and translated them into a one-person kitchen, and dreamt up my own low-calorie
Okay, so all these
cooking.
recipes in your two books are strictly Greer
Well, as
Underwood
original
recipes?
as anything can be.
Very good,
You know,
very
there is
good.
nothing new under the sun in the food world.
That's
but
true, but you put different thoughts and ideas together as to what your family would like and what you would like.
Well,
and-
what my husband would like, not what my family would like, because my two children are strictly hamburger spaghetti eaters. I
Okay,
mean,
they haven't developed into...
Are you kidding? I have no interest in it at all.
Okay, well, I
Not
have
at
the
all.
same at home, so I guess that we have to wait till we're a little bit older to do those kinds of
I
things.
think so.
Another thing is, on the same line, is how would you define healthy eating?
How would I define healthy eating? Well, I guess across the board. First of all, you want to take in more carbohydrates than either protein or fat foods. And the carbohydrates should not be cookies. The carbohydrates should be more fruits and vegetables, followed by protein foods and fat. But the protein foods, of course, want to be low fat.
Right.
Not very much of that.
Can you tell our audience what some low-fat meats would be? And
Some low-fat meats, of course, are chicken, fish, shellfish. Now, shellfish used to have a very bad reputation for being very high in cholesterol, which I'm sure you're aware of as
Right.
being a registered dietitian yourself. And some years back, the United States government, which publishes the RDA of foods and tests foods for their makeup, decided that the testing that they had done on shellfish was indeed inaccurate, and it really wasn't as high in cholesterol as we had been led to believe. So shellfish is no longer a taboo food
Right.
for people who watch their cholesterol.
also, shellfish is very low in fat.
Yes.
So I always tell people who are watching either fat or cholesterol that shellfish is very permissible. The only one that might be questionable is shrimp. And just to take it easy on that. But basically, they're low-fat foods.
And the price will make us take it easy.
Yeah, right.
That'll come
Right.
back. You can eat beef. There are plenty of beef lovers in this world who do not have to give it up if they
That's
enjoy a
right.
good piece of beef. Just look for beef, which tends to be a little bit tougher. The fattier pieces are the tender pieces, so we'd go for the top round.
Right. Bottom round.
Yeah.
Yeah, even
That's-
tenderloin is considered a lean
Right.
cut, and that's a very nice, the filet
Yes, that's
mignon.
sort of the most elegant beef one can have and enjoy it without
Right.
feeling guilty about it. The other thing I'd really recommend if you're a beef lover and you simply can't live without it, do enjoy it, do pick leaner cuts, but most importantly, learn what a 3 to 4 ounce serving is. We Americans tend to look at a small piece of meat that is a 3 or 4 ounce serving and say, oh, it's enough for a baby, I could eat 2 of those. And that's where we need to re-educate
Right,
ourselves.
we don't need those amounts, it's
We
not
don't.
necessary.
We can enjoy the beef, but we don't need to gorge on it.
Right,
It's
right.
important to learn what a small serving is.
Right, and we can do a lot of, today people like to do a lot of stir fry, and so in that way you can incorporate
Really stretch it.
small amounts of meat,
Right.
lots of vegetables, put it on rice or pasta or noodles, and here you've got the whole dinner all in one.
Yes.
And it can be done in 20 minutes. Zip zap. Okay, well, this leads us into the next question as far as talking about healthy eating and fats in the diet. How would you define saturated fat so people can know the difference between saturated fat and cholesterol? Yeah.
Between saturated fat and cholesterol?
Yeah,
Or
sometimes
between saturated fat
people
and
get
unsaturated
confused.
fat?
Well, there are those distinctions as well,
Yeah.
but
Well, saturated fat, the way I like to remember it, I read this is not my original thought, but I thought it was a wonderful way to describe it. How can you tell whether a food has saturated fat or unsaturated fat? And that is to think of the fat in the food when it's cold.
Right.
For instance, after you cooked a roast chicken and you put what's left into the refrigerator, the fat in the bottom of that pan stays a little bit soft and mushy no matter how cold it gets. On the other hand, if you put what's left of a roast beef into the refrigerator after you've eaten it, that fat becomes very hard.
Right.
Now, the fat in beef is more saturated than the fat in chicken, and that's the way I have always remembered to this
Right.
day. If the fat gets hard when it is chilled, then that food is higher in saturated fat.
Right.
If the fat stays soft when it's chilled, then that's unsaturated or more
Polyunsaturated, right.
And cholesterol is found in the saturated fats, in the fats that get hard when cold, not so much in the unsaturated fats.
And I also like to tell people that cholesterol can only come from an animal source.
Excellent.
So
excellent.
that lots of people are confused over,
Yeah.
primarily there's a big one is with peanut butter, and they say, oh, but there's so much fat in peanut butter. I say, yes, there is oil in peanut butter, but it's not either saturated,
Right.
nor is it from cholesterol.
Right.
Cholesterol can only originate from an animal, so there's a good distinction there, too.
You know, I think food companies in some ways have really done a disservice as far as educating the consumers on cholesterol goes, because they have taken to putting no cholesterol on products that wouldn't have cholesterol
right.
anyway,
That's right.
such as a bread product
Right.
or a cereal product. Well, they never had cholesterol.
Right. And they do that because cholesterol is a very big issue today, and they want a share of the market. So
Right.
if they can put no cholesterol, they're more inclined to have people purchase their product.
Right. Even though there shouldn't be, there wouldn't ever be cholesterol in the
They're
product
not
anyway.
actually lying,
No,
because there is
but
no
it is
cholesterol.
misleading, I
Right,
think.
and it is
Yeah.
confusing, and the consumer is confused today
Yeah.
about buying foods, and we do have a lot of different products out there.
You've brought up an excellent point, because cholesterol just isn't found in everything.
No.
And it is in the saturated, but not in the unsaturated fats.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see. From there, how can we reduce saturated fats and cholesterol in people's diets? And this is sort of going along with the same
Yeah, well, we have
trend.
to first of all find out what foods have fat in them, and that can be somewhat confusing. I think a lot of people think, oh, I don't eat much fat. I always trim the fat off of a piece of beef that I eat, and I don't eat chicken skin. But they forget that there's fat that they can't see.
Right.
For instance, in a Triscuit, not to use a brand name, but just to use an idea, there is fat in a product like that.
Right.
And we have to learn where the hidden fats are, fats in salad dressing that we don't even think about.
Salad dressings can be a killer, especially if
can.
you like blue
Yeah.
cheese and all the creamy ones.
I was stopping at a fast food place very recently, and I just happened to be reading the label, which I always do on the salad
Don't
dressing
we?
that came with it.
Yeah.
And the packet of salad dressing that came with the salad had 450 calories. Now, if I had used the entire packet of salad dressing, I would have been better off having their hamburger.
That's right.
As far as fat goes.
That's right.
But if you're not educated to that, how do you know that? Well, you have to become educated. Reading a good cookbook like Gourmet Light will educate you.
That's right.
So, well, just reading food articles in your local newspaper. I think you have to become a very avid reader of food labels. Look for calories, look for percentage of fat.
Right, and fat grams. And
fat
I was
grams.
going to ask some
Yeah.
questions about the fat grams, because with nutritional labeling today, that is down there, and that is really probably, I feel, the single most important thing to zero in on is
Yeah.
fat grams. And
Now,
actually,
you had a rule of thumb that you told me about for fat grams. That
Yes.
was 5.
well, okay, I feel this way. When a person is dieting, that really no one particular food should probably have more than 5 grams of fat. Okay, with the upper level going for 100, but I would think 5 grams to every 100 calories of food, especially in people who are dieting, because that way we're under 50%. That's a fairly safe level, and it gives some people to look at, for something to look at. So 5 grams for every 100 calories would be okay, and this is ideal primarily with people who are watching their calories in order to reduce. For the normal person, their diet should contain no more than 30% of fat calories. And of that, only 10% should be saturated. Now we get into confusion.
Yes, because as a lay person, they're saying, oh, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to know how many percentages
Right.
all these different foods have, and that's a very, very difficult thing
Well,
to do.
I do have something, though, that I can offer to people, and I wanted to show this, so that I won't go into all this detailed business right now, but the Dairy Council has come out with a very nice little booklet that if you write into Carol's Kitchen, I can send for these. It's called Healthy Dividends, and it deals with fat grams of foods, so that you can open up the page and you can look up certain foods and you can see right away how much fat they have if they're in the 5, 10, 15, and higher fat level. And this is a good, very good tool. That's a brand new booklet that came out by the Dairy
A good way to
Association.
educate yourself.
Yeah, and I thought I would offer that today, and so if people would like to send in, I'd be happy to get that for them. And this will help with the fat gram business. So I just thought I'd throw that in,
That's
along with
great.
the Enlightened Gourmet and
Yeah.
everything else.
That's great.
Okay, now we have to talk a little bit about canola oil.
Yes. Well, we were talking a moment ago about how can you reduce the fat in your diet. And one good way to reduce fat in your diet, I think, or to get better fats into your diet, is to look for products in the supermarket that you have been ways to substitute for things that you normally use. I think all of us, particularly in the summertime, use mayonnaise, for example. And this time of year, we can be using a cholesterol-free, reduced-calorie mayonnaise as well as a regular mayonnaise, such as the one that Cane's puts out. Cane's, too, has a booklet. While we're telling people, shall we show this too?
You go right
Okay.
ahead, because we have another freebie offer today.
Okay. Cane's Mayonnaise, which is made here in New England, puts out a 5-minute guide to healthier eating. It's a small brochure that they've put out, which is also very educational, as is yours, and explains the difference in fats, the difference between saturated fat and unsaturated fat. And I think perhaps even more importantly than the healthy tips to good eating that are in here, there are some excellent recipes and a 30% off coupon as well. And if you want that brochure, you can get it by just sending a postal card. You don't need to send an envelope, to the Cane's 5-Minute Guide to Healthier Eating. And that's Post Office Box 347 in Ayer, that's A-Y-E-R, Massachusetts, 01432. Using a product such as a low-calorie, cholesterol-free mayonnaise will save you
Half the calories?
half the calories and half the fat in 1 tablespoon, and you won't miss any of the taste.
No.
And that's what reduced fat cooking is all about. Looking for ways to cheat the calories and to cheat the fat content without cheating the taste.
Right, right.
For instance, instead of using butter to saute onions when you're going to make a stew or something, I just use chicken broth.
Okay.
And save butter and oil right there.
And when I'm stirring or sauteing, and I've started with a tablespoon of oil, especially with vegetables, you can always bring it up more with just throwing a little water in there. You
Yes.
don't have to keep putting more oil.
No.
It's not necessary.
That's right.
You can keep steaming it down with a little bit of water, so that you can really keep those fat calories low.
Yeah, you can keep them out of there.
All right. Maybe we should tell folks some foods that are listed with canola oil. And why is canola oil a better oil?
Canola oil, the oil that Cane's uses to make their cholesterol-free mayonnaise, comes from Canada, and it comes from a small little seed. It is a better oil because it is very, very high in unsaturated fats and very low in saturated fats. And saturated fats, as we said before, are the bad fats. Unsaturated fats are good fats. We do need some fat in our diet.
Right.
And canola oil is just very high in unsaturated fats and very low in saturated fats.
Right.
Cane's uses it to make mayonnaise. Most of the other mayonnaise companies use other kinds of oil that are higher.
And they also
in
use
saturated fat.
hydrogenated fats.
Yeah, and as soon as you hydrogenate an oil, you raise the cholesterol value of the oil.
Right. You raise the cholesterol and the saturation level because you're putting extra hydrogen bonds in there that were taken out in the first place.
Spoken like a true dietitian. Sounded real good.
Okay.
Just a note to your listeners. When you're label reading, watch out for that word hydrogenated, because it almost always means that the cholesterol content will be higher.
Right. It means that what they took out in the first place, they have
Then they
now
put it back in. Yeah, it doesn't
and
make a lot of
essentially
sense.
what they're doing that for is for shelf life of the product, and they're not doing that to help us.
Right.
It extends shelf life. How about with summer cooking right now? What can folks do to reduce fat and lower calories?
Yeah, this is the time when we really want to whip up those egg salad sandwiches and potato salads, don't we?
Yeah, right.
So we want to be careful
Cookouts,
about that, certainly. Well, cooking out is an ideal way to keep the fat low, but keep away from the barbecue sauces that are made with a half a cup of oil. You simply don't need that much oil in a barbecue sauce anyway. Whenever you see a barbecue sauce that has a half a cup of oil, think a couple tablespoons of oil and increase the other liquid that's in it.
Well, speaking of that, do you have a barbecue sauce that you'd use that you could recommend?
I don't usually use barbecue sauces too much myself. I just don't happen to care for the flavor of it, and I hate to sound like I'm harping on mayonnaise, but I'll tell you what I do use instead.
Okay.
I like to take my old pastry brush, dip it in the mayonnaise jar, cholesterol-free, reduced calorie, of course, and slather that on top of a piece of swordfish and then throw it on the grill, and it's excellent.
That
If you
sounds
want to
very
get a little bit fancier, you can add all kinds of spices and herbs, some lemon juice, a little
Some
lime,
garlic.
whatever you like, whatever happens to be appealing that
Very
particular
good.
day. The mayonnaise seals in the moisture in the food, but you haven't added very many calories at all.
Okay, that's a very good idea.
That's a quick one that I use.
Okay. And what about the summer salads now, too?
And summer salads, what a wonderful time for that. Again, I really watch my salad dressings. I make my own. I don't particularly care for the low-calorie bottled ones. I don't think they taste very good. So I make my own. There's an excellent poppy seed dressing in the guide.
Okay.
Which
and
is
you make
very,
your
very
own
nice.
with canola oil or
Well, either with canola oil, with mayonnaise.
olive oil.
I substitute a lot of chicken broth for part of the oil. It does make the dressing a little bit runnier, but not terribly
Right,
so.
right.
I use very flavorful vinegars, such as balsamic or raspberry, so that you
Turmeric.
get lots of flavor there. I use a really good tasting olive oil so that I get a really nice flavor from just
Right.
a little bit of oil. I use a lot of sesame oil, which has almost no calories, not because it's lower in calorie. It's still 100 calories a tablespoon, but you don't use very much of it, and you get an awful lot of flavor.
That sounds
So a
very
little
good.
bit of sesame oil, Chinese sesame oil, goes a long way. Great flavor. And
Where
you don't
can
use
we
very much.
purchase Chinese sesame oil?
Look in your Chinese section of your supermarket.
Okay, the larger
It's a-
chains would sell
It's a
them.
small bottle.
Okay.
There is a large sesame oil sold by Hain, H-A-I-N, but I'm talking about the small aromatic oil. Has a lot of flavor.
Okay, and a little bit of that can go a long way.
Very long way. It's great just in a little bit of green beans with a little bit of chopped up red pepper.
That's
and you
something
don't
new
need a tablespoon
for me.
of butter. It tastes great.
Okay, that's
Lots of
something new
flavor.
for me. That sounds very good. Well, I think what we're going to have to do is wrap this up now. And if you have a final comment for the show or how you feel about low-cal cooking or your cookbook, feel free.
No, I just like to say that we all can eat very, very well. We don't need to sacrifice. We don't need to go on a restricted diet of celery and water. We can truly enjoy our food if we'll just take the time to learn about what is good for us and what is not good for us. Reading pamphlets, such as we both showed, food magazines, whatever. Learning a little bit about nutrition can go a very long way, but you do need to make a conscious daily effort to change your habits. Cutting back on fat for a week is not going to help. It needs to be a lifelong kind of experience.
Okay. Thank you, Greer, and it was
Thank you
very nice for you
much.
to come.
I enjoyed coming. Thank you.
Okay. Good night now.